The crystalline spires of the Galactic Academy of Defensive Arts pierced the morning sky of Kepler 442b like frozen lightning. Within its translucent walls, Professor Kethra adjusted her ceremonial robes and prepared for another day of teaching combat theory to the galaxy's most privileged offspring. Her forearms moved in practiced elegance as she arranged the ritual training implements, each one a work of art as much as a weapon. The Academy's grand dojo stretched before her like a cathedral of learning, its floors polished to mirror perfection, and its walls adorned with holographic displays showing the 17 classical forms of galactic martial doctrine. Students from across the Confederation gathered here, the blue-skinned Zephyrians with their perfect balance, the silicon-based crystallites whose movements created musical tones, and the energy beings from the Veil Nebula who fought with pure thought. Today, however, would be different. Today, they would host their first exchange student from the recently discovered world in the Sol system, a Deathworlder, as the crude terminology went. Kethra had read the briefings with mixture of curiosity and concern. Earth, a Class IX. Hazard world where gravity was crushing, the atmosphere was corrosive, and the native life forms engaged in something called predation. The very concept made her tertiary stomach queasy. The Academy's crystalline doors chimed softly as the new student entered. Kethra's breath caught in her throat. She had expected something monstrous fangs, claws, perhaps visible armor plating. Instead, she saw a slight human teenager with dark hair and quiet eyes, wearing the simple brown robes of a first-year student. He moved with an unusual economy of motion, each step deliberate but relaxed, as if he were constantly aware of his surroundings without appearing tense. Professor Kethra, the human said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't identify. I'm Sam Chun. Thank you for accepting me into your program. The other students had gathered in the traditional semicircle, their various forms of curiosity, evident despite their attempts at proper academy decorum. Zara, a Zephyrian noble whose family had attended the academy for 12 generations, whispered something to her companion that made several students suppress what might have been laughter. Mr. Chun, Kethra replied, her voice carrying the formal cadence of centuries of teaching. Welcome to the Academy. I trust you've studied the preliminary forms during your journey? Sam nodded, producing a datapad that looked almost primitive compared to the holographic displays around them. I've reviewed the materials. Your fighting systems are very beautiful, very precise. There was something in his tone, not mockery, but perhaps a kind of polite puzzlement that made Kethra's secondary hearts skip a beat. She had dealt with skeptical students before, but this felt different. This felt like someone who had seen something else entirely. Today, she announced to the class, we will demonstrate the third form of harmonic defense. Mr. Chun, you will observe and then attempt to replicate what you see. This form has been perfected over 3,000 years of refinement. The students arranged themselves in the traditional formation. Kethra began the demonstration, her movements flowing like water, each gesture a perfect arc that spoke of countless hours of practice. Her robes billowed in precisely choreographed patterns as she moved through the 27 steps of the form, each one designed to showcase both defensive capability and aesthetic beauty. The other students followed, their own interpretations, adding flourishes of racial specialty. The crystallites chimed softly with each movement. The Zephyrians seemed to float rather than step, and the energy beings left trails of soft light in the air. It was, Kethra knew, a breathtaking display of civilized martial artistry. When they finished, she turned to Sam expectantly. Your thoughts, Mr. Chun? Sam was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes taking in the assembled students with an intensity that made several of them shift uncomfortably. When he spoke, his voice carried no disrespect, but somehow his words felt like stones dropping into still water. It's very graceful, he said finally. But what happens if someone actually tries to hurt you? The question hung in the air like a challenge that no one quite knew how to answer. Asterisk. The silence in the grand dojo stretched uncomfortably as Professor Kethra processed Sam's question. Around them, the other students exchanged glances that ranged from confused to offended. Zara, the Zephyrian noble, actually took a step backward as if the human's words had been somehow contaminating. Mr. Chun, Kethra said carefully, her voice carrying the patient tone she reserved for particularly slow. Students, the galactic martial doctrine is not merely about hurting someone. It is about harmony, about bringing balance to conflict through superior technique and mental discipline. We have evolved beyond such primitive concepts. Sam nodded politely, but his expression remained unchanged. I understand. But in a real fight, there are no real fights in civilized space, interrupted Veltar, an energy being whose form flickered with irritation. Such things are relics of pre-spaceflight barbarity. We resolve conflicts through formal challenges, governed by ancient protocols and witnessed by registered judges. What if someone doesn't follow the protocols? Sam asked. The question seemed to genuinely puzzle the assembled students. Kethra realized that in all her centuries of teaching, no one had ever asked such a thing. The very concept of someone refusing to follow established combat conventions was unthinkable. Perhaps, she said, straightening to her full height, a practical demonstration would be helpful. Mr. Chun, would you care to engage in a simple sparring match? Nothing elaborate, just basic defensive positioning. I will use only first form techniques, and you may improvise as you see fit. Sam hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Are you sure? I mean, I don't want to. I have been teaching combat theory for 4 centuries, Kethra said with a slight smile. I believe I can handle whatever a first-year student might attempt. The other students formed a wider circle, their excitement palpable. Several activated recording devices, expecting to capture amusing footage of the primitive Deathworlder being gently schooled in proper technique. Even the Academy's artificial intelligence, Aria, seemed to focus her sensors on the impending demonstration. Kethra moved to the center of the practice area and assumed the traditional ready position, feet precisely shoulder-width apart, arms extended in the classical defensive configuration, her breathing regulated to the standard rhythm taught in first-year classes. Across from her, Sam simply stood with his hands at his sides, weight balanced evenly on both feet. Begin when ready, Kethra announced. She initiated the standard opening sequence, a beautiful flowing movement designed to demonstrate control and readiness while maintaining maximum defensive coverage. Her 4 arms moved in synchronized patterns that had been refined over millennia, each position offering protection while maintaining elegant form. Sam waited until she was fully committed to the movement, then simply stepped to the side. It was such a small thing, such an insignificant adjustment, that for a moment no one understood what had happened. Sam hadn't attempted to counterattack or engage with her technique at all. He had simply moved, but in moving, he had somehow placed himself in a position where none of her carefully choreographed defenses were relevant. Kethra, confused, flowed into the second sequence, adjusting her position to face him properly. Again, Sam stepped this time forward and slightly to her left, inside the range of her extended arms, but somehow not where any of her defensive positions anticipated an opponent might be. Mr. Chun, she said, her voice carrying a note of irritation, you must engage with the forms. You cannot simply. Sam moved again, and this time his hand came up in a gesture so casual it barely seemed intentional. But his fingers found the nerve cluster at the base of her primary right arm, and suddenly that entire limb went numb. Not painful, not damaged, just disconnected. The Grand Dojo fell completely silent. I'm sorry, Sam said immediately, his voice filled with genuine concern. "I didn't mean to. Are you hurt? I can help with the circulation if—" But Kethra wasn't listening. She was staring at her unresponsive arm, her 3 functioning limbs trembling slightly. In 4 centuries of teaching, in all her years of study and practice, she had never encountered anything like what had just happened. The human hadn't used any recognizable technique. He hadn't followed any established form. He had simply moved and somehow negated 400 years of training, with a gesture that looked like he was reaching for a door handle. "How?" she whispered. Sam looked genuinely uncomfortable with the attention. "It's just pressure points. You have a similar nervous system to humans, so, it's not complicated. My grandmother taught me when I was 7, in case I ever had to deal with a drunk tourist getting handsy." The casual mention of violence in such a domestic context sent a collective shiver through the assembled students. This wasn't the ritualized combat they understood. This was something else entirely. Something that spoke of a world where even children learned to defend themselves as naturally as breathing. "Show me," Kethra said quietly, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been hunger. "Show me what else you know." The Grand Dojo had been reconfigured for what Professor Kethra was calling an educational demonstration. The normal practice mats had been replaced with sensor-rich smart surfaces that could analyze and record movement patterns, while holographic displays showed anatomical charts of various species' nervous systems. Word had spread through the academy, and now the circular seating area was packed with students, faculty, and even some off-world visitors who had been attending a conference on theoretical combat applications. Sam Chun sat in the center of it all, looking profoundly uncomfortable with the attention. He had changed from his academy robes into something more familiar, warm jeans and a simple t-shirt that somehow made him look even younger than his 18 years. But there was something in his posture, in the way he held himself, that suggested depths the gathered academics were only beginning to understand. "Mr. Chun," Kethra said, her voice carrying clearly through the dojo's acoustic enhancement system. "You mentioned that your grandmother taught you certain ... techniques. Could you elaborate on the context of such training?" Sam shifted slightly, his dark eyes taking in the sea of alien faces around him. "It wasn't really training, not like this. More like life skills. My grandmother grew up in the territory during the Troubles, and she always said that a person should know how to handle themselves. She taught me some things, and I picked up others." "The Troubles?" asked Dr. Zivka, a crystallite professor of martial philosophy whose form chimed softly with curiosity. "Civil unrest, wars, times when the government couldn't protect everyone, so people had to protect themselves." Sam's voice carried no emotion, but something about the way he said it made several students exchange nervous glances. "She showed me 10 basic moves, said they were simple enough for anyone to learn, but effective enough to save your life." Kethra leaned forward, her recently restored arm functioning normally but somehow feeling different, as if it now carried the memory of its own vulnerability. "Would you ... would you be willing to demonstrate these moves?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving across the assembled crowd. "These aren't for show," he said finally. "They're not art. They're just ... practical. And some of them are designed to hurt people badly." "We understand," Kethra said, though she wondered if any of them truly did. "We have medical facilities, and our recording systems can analyze the techniques for educational purposes. This could be invaluable for our understanding of human defensive capabilities." Sam nodded slowly, then stood up. As he did, his entire demeanor seemed to shift. The uncomfortable teenager disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with the fluid economy of a natural predator. Around the dojo, Conversations died as various species' threat assessment instincts began to ping warnings. "The first move," Sam said, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly quiet space, "is called redirect. It's based on something called Aikido, but my grandmother adapted it for when someone grabs you." He gestured to Kethra, who approached with careful steps. "Grab my wrist," he said, "like you're trying to drag me somewhere." Kethra reached out and grasped his wrist with her primary right hand, her grip firm but not painful. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sam's hand rotated slightly, his body turned just a few degrees, and suddenly Kethra found herself off balance, her own momentum carrying her past him, while his free hand guided her fall into a controlled tumble. "The thing about redirect," Sam explained, as Kethra picked herself up, "is that it uses the attacker's own force against them. You're not fighting their strength, you're borrowing it." The sensors in the practice mat were going wild, recording force vectors and movement patterns that seemed to defy conventional physics. Around the dojo, several professors were taking frantic notes. "The second move is grapple," Sam continued. "This one I learned from wrestling with crocodiles." The casual mention of wrestling with apex predators sent another collective shiver through the audience. On Earth, Sam's statement would have been understood as referring to a specific training technique used by wildlife handlers. Here, it sounded like a description of recreational combat with death itself. Sam demonstrated a technique that looked deceptively simple, a way of getting behind an opponent and controlling their movement by manipulating their balance and breathing. But when he showed it on Kethra, the professor found herself completely immobilized, unable to move without risking serious injury to her own joints. "The third move is pack strike," Sam said, releasing her gently. "Humans hunt in groups, so this is designed to create openings for others to exploit." He showed them a combination that started with a seemingly gentle push, but created a cascade of mechanical advantages, leaving the target vulnerable from multiple angles simultaneously. Even demonstrated slowly, the technique had a ruthless efficiency that made the watching academics deeply uncomfortable. "The fourth is snake dodge," Sam continued. "Where I grew up, we had taipan snakes that could kill you in minutes. This is how you avoid something that's faster than you are." The movement was so fluid, it barely seemed like movement at all. Sam simply wasn't where an attack expected him to be, having somehow slipped away from danger while simultaneously positioning himself for a counterstrike that would target his opponent's most vulnerable areas. "The fifth move is calm breath," Sam said, and for the first time, his voice carried something that might have been emotion. "This one's for when something is hunting you, and you need to stay quiet long enough to survive." He showed them a breathing technique that seemed to slow his heart rate and reduce his metabolic signature to almost nothing. The dojo's sensors, calibrated for various alien physiologies, could barely detect his presence, even though he was standing in plain sight. As Sam moved through the remaining 5 techniques, each one more unsettling than the last they assembled, academics began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. These weren't martial arts in any sense they recognized. These were survival tools refined by millions of years of evolution on a world that had tried to kill humanity at every opportunity. And humanity had not only survived, they had turned that survival into an art form. The Grand Dojo had fallen into an almost religious silence as Sam demonstrated the final moves. The 6th technique, poison resistance, involved a meditation method that could slow the spread of toxins through the human body, a skill that assumed exposure to deadly substances was a routine occurrence. The 7th, predator patience, was a stalking technique that could allow a human to track dangerous prey for days without being detected. The 8th move, storm shelter, showed how to use an opponent's own attacks as protection against multiple threats, a technique born from surviving in environments where the weather itself could kill. The 9th, Fire Walk demonstrated how to move through hazardous terrain while maintaining combat readiness, including what Sam casually described as navigating a burning building while someone's shooting at you. But it was the 10th move that left the entire assembly speechless. "The last one," Sam said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the assembled crowd, "is called Guardian's Sacrifice. It's not really a fighting technique. It's what you do when you can't run, can't hide, and can't win, but you still have to protect someone." He demonstrated on Kethra, moving with a kind of terrible gentleness that somehow communicated absolute lethality. The technique was designed to disable multiple opponents simultaneously, even at the cost of serious injury to the practitioner. It was a method of fighting that assumed the defender would not survive, but might buy enough time for others to escape. "My grandmother learned it during the Brisbane siege," Sam said quietly. "She used it to save 30 children when the evacuation center was overrun. It cost her 2 fingers and her left eye, but everyone she was protecting made it out alive." The silence that followed was profound. Around the dojo, beings from dozens of species, many of whom had never known true violence, tried to process what they had witnessed. These weren't the elegant ceremonial combat forms they had studied for centuries. These were tools forged in the crucible of a world that had demanded the ultimate sacrifice from its children. "Learn to fight, or die." Professor Kethra stood slowly, her 4 arms trembling slightly. "Mr. Chun," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "how many humans know these techniques?" Sam shrugged, the gesture somehow carrying the weight of his entire species' history. "Most of us know some version of them. We adapt them to whatever threats we face. A kid growing up in the Australian outback learns different moves than someone from inner-city Detroit, but the principles are the same. You learn to survive, or you don't survive." "But your world is civilized now," protested Dr. Zivka. "Surely such skills are no longer necessary?" Sam's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested depths of experience that made the assembled academics profoundly uncomfortable. "Professor, my hometown has the highest population of venomous snakes per square kilometer of anywhere on Earth. The nearest hospital is 4 hours away by air, and that's only if the weather's good. Last year, a 16-year-old girl named Jenny Matthews fought off a 20-foot saltwater crocodile with nothing but a pocket knife and a broken bottle." He paused, letting that sink in. She was protecting her little brother while they were fishing. She didn't think of herself as a hero. She was just doing what anyone would do. That's what I mean when I say these techniques are part of who we are. They're not special skills for special people. They're just ... human. The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. The beings gathered in the Grand Dojo represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization philosophers, artists, scientists, and warriors from species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered disease, and built societies that spanned star systems. Yet here was a teenager from a planet they had dismissed as primitive, demonstrating capabilities that rendered their most advanced combat theories obsolete. "You're telling us," Kethra said slowly, "that every human possesses these abilities?" "Not every human," Sam corrected, "but most of us learn some version of them. We have to. Earth doesn't give us a choice." Veltar, the energy being, flickered with what might have been distress. "Your entire species has been shaped by constant warfare." "Not warfare," Sam said, and for the first time his voice carried something that might have been sadness. "Survival. There's a difference. We don't fight because we want to. We fight because everything else on our planet is trying to kill us. The weather, the animals, the bacteria, the plants, even the ground itself. We learned to be dangerous because the alternative was extinction." He looked around the dojo, taking in the faces of beings who had never known true hunger, never felt the presence of a predator, never been forced to choose between fight and flight. You call us Deathworlders like it's an insult. But we prefer guardians, because that's what we are. We learned to protect ourselves so we could protect others. Every human technique, every skill we've developed, comes from the need to keep our families, our communities, our species alive. The weight of his words settled over the assembly like a shroud. In the space of a single demonstration, Sam Chun had rewritten their understanding of human capability, and by extension, humanity's place in the galactic community. They had thought of Earth as a curiosity, its inhabitants as primitive beings who had somehow stumbled into spaceflight. Instead, they had discovered that humanity was a species of natural-born protectors, shaped by millions of years of surviving in conditions that would have destroyed most other forms of life. What happens now? Kethra asked, her voice carrying. A note of something that might have been Sam smiled for the first time since the demonstration began, and the expression transformed his entire face. Now, I hope you'll teach me some of those beautiful forms you showed me earlier. Just because something is practical doesn't mean it can't be elegant too. Maybe we can learn from each other. The suggestion hung in the air like a bridge between worlds, a possibility that had never existed before this moment. 3 months after what Academy historians would later call the Chen demonstration, the Grand Dojo had been transformed. Where once stood rigid displays of classical combat forms, now there were fluid practice areas where students from across the galaxy worked alongside human instructors, learning to blend the elegant traditions of their homeworlds with the practical wisdom of Earth's survival arts. Professor Kethra stood at the observation deck, watching as Zara the Zephyrian noble, who had once whispered mockingly about the primitive Deathworlder, worked through a modified version of the redirect technique with Sam. The young human had been infinitely patient with his classmates, adapting his grandmother's teachings to accommodate different physiologies and cultural contexts. What had emerged was something unprecedented, a synthesis of martial philosophy that combined the beauty of galactic traditions with the raw effectiveness of human survival skills. The morning meditation session went well. Arya reported the Academy's AI manifesting as a soft holographic presence beside the professor. Heart rate stabilized 15% faster than baseline, and the crystallite students achieved harmonic resonance 12 minutes earlier than their previous best. Kethra nodded, but her attention was focused on the students below. They weren't just learning techniques, they were learning to think differently. The concept of practical application had been foreign to most of them, but under Sam's guidance, they were beginning to understand that true mastery came not from perfect execution of predetermined forms, but from the ability to adapt and survive. "Professor," came a voice from behind her, and she turned to see Dr. Zivka approaching, his crystalline form chiming softly with what she had learned to recognize as excitement. "The Council of Academic Excellence has reached a decision regarding Mr. Chun's unique contributions to our curriculum." Kethra felt her secondary hearts skip a beat. The council, composed of representatives from 12 major galactic civilizations, had been debating the implications of human combat techniques for weeks. Some argued that such primitive methods had no place in civilized education. Others contended that ignoring humanity's defensive capabilities would be dangerously foolish. "And," she prompted, "they voted to establish a new department, Dr. Zivka announced, his form brightening with pleasure. "Applied survival arts, with a focus on cross-species defensive techniques. They want you to head it, with Mr. Chun as your co-director." The news should have filled her with joy, but instead, Kethra found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with Sam just that morning. He had been sitting in the garden, watching the sunrise through the Academy's crystal walls when she had found him. "Do you miss it?" she had asked. "Your home, I mean." Sam had been quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the alien. "Sunrise. I miss my grandmother," he had said finally. "She died while I was traveling here. Heart attack, quick and clean. She would have liked this place, I think. She always said that the best way to honor the dead was to keep their lessons alive." Now, looking down at the students who were learning those lessons, Kethra understood what Sam had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about combat techniques or survival skills. It was about connection, the fundamental truth that all intelligent beings, regardless of their origin, shared the same basic need to protect what they loved. "There's something else," Dr. Zivka continued. "The Council has approved a request from the Confederation Military Academy. They want to establish a joint training program. It seems that certain ... incidents along the frontier have made them realize that our current defensive doctrines may be insufficient for dealing with less civilized threats." Kethra nodded, understanding the implications. The galaxy was a vast place, and not all of its inhabitants had achieved the level of civilization that the core worlds enjoyed. Pirates, raiders, and worse things lurked in the spaces between stars, and traditional combat forms, however beautiful, had proven inadequate for dealing with beings who refused to follow established protocols. "What did the Council say about human philosophy?" she asked. "That's the interesting part," Dr. Zivka replied. "They've concluded that what we initially perceived as primitive brutality is actually a highly sophisticated approach to conflict resolution. The humans don't fight to dominate or to prove superiority. They fight to end threats as quickly and efficiently as possible so they can return to protecting their communities." Down in the practice area, Sam was demonstrating a modified version of the Guardian Sacrifice technique to a group of advanced students. But he had transformed it, showing them how to achieve the same protective effect without the self-destructive elements. It was, Kethra realized, a perfect metaphor for what was happening throughout the academy. The humans weren't teaching them to be more violent. They were teaching them to be more effective at ending violence. "There's going to be a ceremony," Dr. Zivka announced. "The Council wants to formally recognize Mr. Chun's contributions to galactic defense theory. They're calling it the Integration Honors, the first time a first-year student has ever received such recognition." Kethra smiled, imagining Sam's reaction to such formal recognition. He would probably be mortified by the attention, she thought, but perhaps that was part of what made him so effective as a teacher. He had no ego invested in his techniques, no pride that prevented him from adapting them to new contexts. He simply wanted to help people survive. "When is the ceremony?" she asked. "Next week. And Professor ... They're expecting you to present him with the honor as his primary instructor." The irony wasn't lost on her. In the space of a few months, she had gone from being Sam's teacher to being his student. And now she was being asked to formally recognize achievements that had fundamentally changed her understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. As she watched the students below humans and aliens working together, learning from each other, building something new from the synthesis of their different approaches, Kethra realized that this was what Sam's grandmother had really taught him. Not just how to fight, but how to bring people together in the face of danger. How to transform the art of survival into the art of protecting others. The Deathworlder had indeed shown them 10 moves, but the most important lesson he had taught them couldn't be demonstrated in a dojo.